Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and I'm back with another very non-traditional Mother's Day card that could apply to just about any occasion. Since we're getting so close to the actual day this year, I'm doing more all-occasion type cards that would also work for Mother's Day cards. So I pulled out this Waffle Flower Rainbows stamp set and the Rainbow Panel wafer die and the Rainbow Word wafer die sets. I keep them all stored together because they're all created to go together. And I die cut some Bristol smooth cardstock with several of the dies, and then I pulled out several different distress inks so I can color the little like actual rainbow pieces with them. And I just smushed the inks onto the little Teflon mat that's attached to my Holtz glass media mat because at the time I just didn't feel like pulling that off. And as you guys can see when I'm creating, everyone's been asking FYI, what I think about this glass mat. I'm loving it. It's not giving me any more space. I'm still like completely disorganized and end up with like a square foot of crafting space, but I really do like the glass media mat. So I used a little bit of purple tape here, and I had the sticky side facing up, and then I used just two little pieces to tape that down. And then that way I was able to hold these pieces in place so that I could, you know, color them without getting my fingers all over them. And it just made things a lot easier. I've done this a lot of these. I used to always use painter's tape to do this because when you want to color little small pieces or things where you're coloring the entire piece and you don't want to get, you know, your fingers in the way, etc. This is just something that makes it simple to hold everything in place. So I just kept smushing my distress ink colors, and I'm just picking up the color with my water brush and painting it on. Doesn't have to be perfect. I kind of like the variation in the color and whatnot. And Bristol smooth cardstock always takes inks and whatnot differently because of that coating, which I like. So I coated that, and then I had the word and then this little tiny rainbow die cut, and I left those in the cardstock. That gave me something to hold, so I didn't have to fiddle around with tape or anything. So that way I can go along, and I just kept reusing the inks that I had used earlier to make that sentiment in rainbow order. It just needed to be done, of course. So I painted that as well as the little mini stripes on this tiny little rainbow, and those, because they're die cut, the colors don't really run into each other. They did a tiny little bit here and there, but I'm not worried about it. I'm going to use it on the inside of the card, and it's just cute. So I added all my color, and then kind of off camera, because you can't really see where I was holding it, but I was holding the distress spray bottle a good 1.5 feet maybe up from my work surface, and I sprayed everything with water. And then I hit it with my heat tool just a bit, just to kind of activate it a little bit more, because distress inks activate with water. And then let it sit for 30 seconds or so, maybe a little bit longer. And then I pressed a paper towel in there to sop up that excess water. And then I get that fabulous splatter look that is so much fun with distress inks. So then I'm set those aside so they can completely dry. And then my card base is more Bristol smooth cardstock that I had cut to 4 1/4 by 11 and scored at 5 1/2. So this will be a top folding A2 size card. And I pulled out some tumbled glass and some broken china distress inks. These are like my go-to colors for skies, always. Especially the tumbled glass. I've been debating whether or not to start getting some of the full-size distress ink pads, and this would be like the first one I would get because I use this so often, and I have re-inked it so many times. It's kind of crazy because I use it all the time. Even my little ink blending sponge for this color is almost completely worn out. I use it so much. I love, if you want just a really smooth, light background color for a sky, tumbled glass is the way to go. But yeah, I started with that, and then my other go-to is the broken china. I love using them together because the broken china it blends so perfectly into the tumbled glass. So I can get just this really nice, gorgeous color. So I started from the bottom of my card front here and just kept pulling the ink up kind of towards the top so it just kind of fade off into white and just look super pretty. And because I'm working on the Bristol Smooth and it has that coating, it takes distress inks like a dream, and it just makes it so much easier to blend, and you don't get any lines or anything like that. So I blended on all of that color, and then I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to spray it with my distress sprayer after I get some of the stuff out of the way so I don't get it all covered in water. Spray it with my distress sprayer, let that sit for a few seconds, and then again hit it with my heat tool because that just kind of starts to absorb the water a little bit more, like dries it up a bit and gets more of a reaction. And then let that sit for a few more seconds, picked up with a paper towel, get that great, fabulous splatter look. So I'm going to let that dry. And then in the rainbow panel wafer die set is this large frame die. So I die cut another piece of Bristol Smooth with that. The centerpiece I'll just save with all my cardstock because I can use that obviously again. I just want the frame. So I've die cut that frame, and then I have a piece of transparency here that I'm going to cut to just slightly smaller than an A2 card front. So it's about like 4 1/8 of an inch by 5 3/8. I was just eyeballing it just to make sure it wasn't the full size to make things simpler. This frame is A2 size, so it's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And I flipped it over, and I'm using multi-medium matte adhesive I'm just running that along closer to the inside of the frame, but trying not to apply too thick because I don't want it oozing out. And I'm just going to use that to adhere my transparency. I usually prefer using like tape runners or things like that when I'm working with transparency, just because I don't like the adhesive oozing everywhere. But this frame is pretty narrow, so it was more convenient to use the multi-medium matte. So before this has had a chance to fully dry, I realized I wanted to adhere the die cut cloud and rainbow piece and slip it underneath that frame. So the adhesive hasn't dried yet, so I was able to quickly slip that in under it. And I also used multi-medium matte. And it was about this point when I started realizing it was like, this all would have been so much easier if I had run all that cardstock through my Xyron machine and coated it with adhesive before die cutting it. I don't like doing it afterwards because it's harder to control the adhesive, you know, and it'll stick out the sides and whatnot with the Xyron. I've shown it in a ton of videos. I prefer die cutting, running it through my machine and then die cutting it with the adhesive on the back, and it's perfect. I was like, I could have just saved so much time and effort doing that, but hindsight. A lot of times I get wrapped up making, you know, whatever it is I'm making, and then it's like halfway through or near the end, it's like, oh, I could have made things so much easier. But it still worked with the multimedia matte. It was just more fiddling in the end. So after I've kind of adhered everything to that frame and transparency, I grabbed my scrap of black cardstock. I always keep the scrap on my desk. Until I use it up completely. I don't even bother putting it away because 99% of the time I'm using it to stamp sentiments on to heat emboss. And that's what I did. So I used my anti-static powder tool, and then I stamped 2 sentiments from the Rainbows stamp set with Ink on 3's Juicy embossing ink. And then I'm using the Simon's Stamp white fine detail embossing powder. That's kind of like my favorite go-to combo right now is the Juicy embossing ink and Simon's detail white embossing powder. It's just perfect for sentiments. So after I had melted that with my heat tool, I'm going to use my little guillotine trimmer here to trim these down into narrow strips. And I'd stamped both sentiments, like tried to line them up as evenly as possible so I could do all my cuts at once and have both of them, you know, cut to the same size little strips here. And then for this little Rainbows die cut sentiment, again, this is where it would have been so much easier if I'd used my Xyron instead of fiddling. I don't like fiddling with liquid adhesive to stack sentiments, but it still works. So I die cut 2 more from just white cardstock. So I'm going to stack all 3 of these layers together just to give this die cut sentiment a little bit more dimension. And then I'm going to trim off the S with my scissors because I just want the word to be rainbow, not rainbows. So after I just waited till I had them all stacked together. I thought it just made it a little bit easier. And I just trimmed the S off with scissors. And now I can apply adhesive to the back of this and adhere it to the card front here. So once I have this adhered into place, I'm just going to put a couple acrylic blocks on top of it just to hold everything down. And yeah, I dropped it on my work surface with adhesive. So I've got multimedia matte all over this glass mat, which before it even had a chance to dry, I just wiped it up with a baby wipe and my fingers and cleaned it off. So it cleans up really easily. So let that kind of dry for a few seconds under the acrylic blocks, and then I'm going to adhere the little black cardstock strips with more multimedia matte adhesive and just press those into place. And then once I did that, the little dot for the eye, I did not stack. I thought about it and I was like, I'm not going to bother. It's so tiny, and I'd spend, 10 minutes fiddling with those tiny little things trying to stack them. So instead, I just put a dot of the adhesive right above the eye, and then kind of lined up the cardstock there, popped that eye out with my little tweezers right onto the adhesive. I don't think it matters that it's not stacked up like the rest of the sentiment. It's done. It was easier that way. So for my actually turning this into a shaker card, I pulled out the Couture Creations foam strips. These are similar to the Doris ones that I love, except these are longer. I can't remember if they're thicker or thinner. They're about the same. They're just a longer set, and it actually kind of worked out perfectly because 2 strips of this will do the entire frame of this A2 frame. So I did 2 layers of that just to give this a bit more depth because of what I'm going to use to add as my shaker element. So I went around and did 2 layers of foam tape. And then for my actual shaker elements, I pulled out these Lucy's Diamonds, the Rainbow Bright ones. They're absolutely gorgeous, and I have bought multiple packs of them. That's why I have them in such a large container, and I've literally been hoarding them for months now. I don't think I've used them on anything. So I have this great big huge container of like, this is like 3 or 4 packs at least of these. And even then I was kind of being stingy at first, and I was like just sprinkling a few. And then I finally, you know, told myself, this is ridiculous. You have millions of these. So I sprinkled a lot in my card. And the only thing I would have done differently is I would have used my anti-static powder tool around the inside of the frame on the foam tape there. This foam tape's really sticky, and these jewels ended up sticking to a lot of the inside. You'll kind of see it in the pictures at the end. I'm okay with it, but again, hindsight. I wasn't about to pull this card apart to try and fix that because it would have ripped everything. But just FYI, this foam tape is pretty sticky. So I was okay with it though, because then you can kind of see the jewels more anyway. But that is kind of what happened. So I also decided to adhere a bunch of these in the similar colors to the little rainbow strips. And these really are like diamonds. They are, you know, kind of faceted, and they're pointed, and then they have a flat end on one side, kind of, but it's hard to explain. When you see them in person, they literally look like little colored diamonds. That's the shape of them. So I just adhered all that mine with the little bit of the flat side down, so the pointed side's kind of peeking up, because that's really the only way you can adhere them. So I just added them to those with some multimedia matte adhesive. And then once that's dry, like these are adhered down and they're good to go. And then for the inside of the card, I'm going to ink up a sentiment from that rainbow set with Ink on 3's blackout ink. And I'm going to stamp that onto the inside of the card. And once I have that stamped, I'm going to adhere that little tiny rainbow that I had die cut and colored. So I've got all the little pieces here. So I'm just going to use my multimedia matte adhesive and then adhere that right above my little sentiment. And that's going to finish off this fun little card that I think would totally work for Mother's Day, but it also would be a really good encouragement card and, you know, a thinking of you card, etc. It could work for just about anything. You know, when it comes to rainbows, they work for anything. So I got all the little pieces adhered, and that finished off my card. So it's got this fun, super fun shaker element. I think we all love shaker cards. This was a lot of fun to make, and it just, you know, that sound, I can sit and play with that all day. So anywho, that is my card for today. I will have links below the video to my blog post with links to all the supplies used. You can check that out below if you're interested. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting on my videos. I really appreciate it. And I will see you all very soon in the next one. Bye.